everybody, and welcome back to another Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review. In today's review, I'm going to be taking a look at one of the latest exciting box set releases, which is of course the New Adventures of Bernice Summerfield Volume 6, as also called Lost in Translation, featuring Lisa Bowerman as the one and only Bernice Summerfield, alongside David Warner as the Unbound Doctor. This box set is of course available to be ordered now on the Big Finish website. The physical box set is £22.99 and the download is £19.99. There is also additional story details on the Big Finish website, as well as a trailer that you can of course listen to. Now of course, if you've seen my previous reviews as a part of this series, you will know I absolutely adore this series overall. It is in fact one of the biggest delves that I made in the very early days of my Big Finish listen into the external worlds of Doctor Who, and as a result it's a series that I've grown very, very fond of. I absolutely adore the Unbound Doctor, and I really love the dynamic with him and Benny. I was really looking forward to seeing what this series was going to do, because Volume 5 was very much the calm before the storm. It was some fun sci-fi adventures, of course, around the universe in many different locations. However, this time round, things are getting a little bit serious, and it throws some challenges in there for the main protagonists of this series. And before we move on to the box set itself, I'd just like to mention as well, of course videos have been a little bit delayed recently. Generally, I'm just going to blame it on the world and the world events that are currently going on and everything in it, which I'm sure you are all aware of. It's a very stressful time for everybody. I've just moved back to university, so that has added a whole new plate of things onto the forever building ball of stress. And if you've been reading the news recently, you will know that university students have been under a lot of stress by the media, and that is something that I'm going to leave there. But basically, it's been a very stressful time. Reviews are going to be continuing in the future, however I just need time to put them together and film them because it's very difficult at the minute, and I just want to get around to them eventually in my own time. So taking a look at the production credits on the Big Finish website, the same usual talent return on this release. The producer of the series is James Goss, the senior producer is David Richardson, the director is Scott Handcock, the music and sound design is by Steve Foxon, and the executive producers are Nicholas Briggs and Jason Haig-Ellery. So delving right in there and taking a look at the first episode of this box set, it is of course Have I Told You Lately, as written by Tim Foley. Now over the past few months I have in fact listened to a number of Tim Foley scripts, and to be honest I've really enjoyed his contributions to the Big Finish universe. I think he creates some really gripping Doctor Who stories that are more than often very, very character driven, and as a result we have this TARDIS team throughout this story, and he does an absolutely excellent job of portraying both of the characters. It's very clear that he has an understanding of both of the characters, both their personalities, and more importantly the dynamic between them, because the first episode of this box set is in fact pretty much a free-hander between Bernice Summerfield, between the Unbound Doctor, as well as the speaker in there as well, which is basically an artificial intelligence, which is the main body of work that is within this unusual spaceship that the TARDIS has so happened to land on. And as a result, due to this being the first story of the box set, you are kind of reminded as to how brilliant this TARDIS team is and the dynamic between them, because we have both of them together throughout the entirety of this story, kind of communicating through this rather dodgy speaker, and as a result I think that their personality really jumps off the page, and it just shows you how excellent this team is together. Lisa Bowerman, as always, is excellent as Bernice Summerfield. By this point within Benny's history, of course, she knows the character inside out. Her personality, and especially her interactions with the Unbound Doctor, are as funny and as brilliant as ever. What I really like about this story is that it does have those roots of history and archaeology and kind of uncovering the past, which is something that is used as a theme throughout the entirety of this box set. Of course, it is titled Lost in Translation, because all four of the stories kind of have a theme of language and uncovering the truth. However, naturally when we think of archaeology and uncovering the truth, we normally have a archaeological dig, digging up bones, digging up broken pots. However, this story is different because we have them essentially digging up ancient languages, because the spaceship that they found themselves within is in fact the Ark of Whispers, and it's basically a library of all of these lost languages, and the speaker has forgotten how to speak, meaning that it's up to Benny and the Doctor to basically teach artificial intelligence the entirety of a language. And due to us having Benny and the Doctor throughout this episode, it's rather difficult because we have two rather strong personalities bickering with each other, because they always do, and it's as funny as ever. Wonderful thing about Benny is that she's the focus of this series. Of course, it's the New Adventures of Bernice Summerfield. However, at the same time, she does have an element of control. She's always the main focus of these stories, even in the presence of this rather unusual incarnation of the Doctor. Of course, I absolutely adore David Warner as the Unbound Unbound Doctor. I've adored his Doctor since I first met him within the audio drama series a number of years ago. There's simply something so intriguing about his incarnation because he's very stern and he's very cold at times as well. He doesn't quite understand human reaction, and of course, especially when we find ourselves within the context of this series, we have a Doctor that has come from a dying universe and everything that he once knew is now gone, and now he's in another universe which isn't his own. However, he feels ever so slightly off, and having both of the characters being separated throughout this story, this episode allows for us to dig into those personalities to show that this Doctor has flaws, and he's a little bit worried about his future and where his life is going, and more importantly, where he fits in. And again, I think that Tim Foley does a very good job of writing that, because both of the characters feel very real, and I love the fact that the petty arguments that they have within the TARDIS off-screen are kind of dragged directly into the plot of this story, and as a result, it makes for a really enjoyable listen for the first episode of the box set, because let's face it, it's basically the equivalent of a train announcer taking over an entire spaceship, and there's something about train announcers and automatic voices and Alexas which is just very, very creepy, and this episode definitely shows that, especially when it constantly says, "Open up, you blasted thing," which is naturally a personality trait of this unusual incarnation of the Doctor. Next up, we move on to The Undying Truth, as written by J.A. Prentice. Now, this is in fact the story that was the winner of the competition. Of course, the previous box set, The New Adventures of Bernice Summerfield Volume 5, was entirely focused around new entries from a Big Finish Bernice Summerfield competition. This time round, we only have one story, and again, we have that whole theme of uncovering the truth, because we find the Doctor and Benny have landed on the planet of Galmoth, and it's basically this jungle world with lots of alien life. However, it turns out that a little field team are there on the planet in order to track down the Undying. However, the rather ironic thing is, the Undying is in fact a dead corpse in a boggy pit and has been dead for many, many centuries. The Undying at one point within its life could turn an army round at the very thought of its name, and also without a weapon being shot, and that is a rather interesting concept throughout this story that again parallels the personality of the Doctor that we see throughout our universe. And very much like episode 1, we kind of have those traits of archaeology, uncovering the truth, and more importantly, digging up a dead corpse, which is something that Benny has done quite a lot throughout her career within the many alien worlds that she has visited. However, this story is a little bit different, and as a result, I'm not really going to go into the plot in too much detail, because it's kind of a revelation that happens from the midpoint onwards. There was one that I really didn't expect, however, it was really creative, and I love the way that it's taken this story, because I found it very believable. We've gone from this rather archaeological uncovering a dead corpse because somebody wants it for a museum or a historical artifact, or simply because they just want it because it looks cool. We have a more corporate twist on that. We have an alternative motive because the exec behind the field trip basically wants the Undying for a specific reason, regardless of who dies in the process. Once again, you have Benny basically living up her best life throughout this story, digging up dead things, trying to figure out what is going on, but also at the same time you have that challenge between the relationship that they have between the Doctor and Benny, because once again the Doctor throughout this story is kind of acting like a John Pertwee-esque version of the Doctor. He is trapped in a cell for the vast majority of the episode, or at least a number of cells, whilst Benny is given the main focus to go and figure out what is going on. However, she overlooks something, and the Doctor is the one to make her realise that something isn't what it seems. And again, what I really appreciate about this story is that due to the script editing, we have that consistent vibe all the way throughout, where this version of the Doctor has kind of realised that even though the universe that he came from was very sad because everything was dying, and it was all very desperate and dystopian and very doomsday in its approach, he's travelled to a new universe that is alive. However, it's still somehow a little bit more miserable than his own. I think that's a really intriguing concept that again shows this incarnation of the Doctor is struggling. So once again, another enjoyable story that I really enjoyed listening to, really showing off the dynamic of the relationship between this companion and Doctor. Next up, we have a contribution from James Goss, and it is Inertia. And this is a story that is just a gem, and again, I applaud you, James Goss, because James Goss has a habit of being really bloody funny. I think that when he hits the mark on a Doctor Who story, he hits the mark in a way that creates such a strong episode that stands out in the mind. There is lots of stories I can think of from him that simply jump off the page due to the way that he writes characters, and there's something about his comedy that seems very sarcastic and funny, and it just hits a mark with me that I really enjoy listening to. And something that I always feel when I listen to a James Goss story is that it's not just listening to an audio drama. You feel the episode itself through the eyes of the characters that you are meant to focus on throughout the script, but also at the same time, James Goss has a very good way of uplifting your mood, because especially when there's a funny story, he can really make the episode funny, and you can leave the story with a smile on your face. I think that is very important. But equally at the same time, James Goss can have a rather twisted way of writing, the likes of Corpse Day within Torchwood, the likes of The Hope, two very depressing stories. So he's kind of a writer that basically is the best of both worlds. That's the only way I can explain it. And the rarity for this story is, once again, we have another very small cast. We have another two-hander, as the Doctor and Benny are on the run from the Time Lords, because due to the Doctor being from a completely different universe, the Time Lords have kind of noticed, and as a result, they are hot on their tail. But the Doctor decides to park the TARDIS on a rather unremarkable world in order to act normal for a bit, be undercover, and basically do nothing out of the ordinary. So as a result, we have Benny and the Doctor on this very unremarkable world, trying to have a normal life. And as we all know, when it comes to the Doctor and Benny, that's impossible. Considering that this is a 1 hour story, it does pass in a way that is very effective. It doesn't feel like 1 hour, and even though it's only 2 characters, I really didn't find it boring or anything like that, because there is something about Benny and this version of the Doctor that is very intriguing to listen to. I think that this is dynamic between this Doctor and companion relationship, where you could quite literally just sit and listen to them sat in a living room for a few hours, nattering on about the universe. I think there's something really endearing about the Unbound Doctor, because yes, he's very reserved, and sometimes he keeps his emotions hidden, and he's also very calculating and manipulative, and he doesn't reveal all of his pieces on the board until the final act of the story. But at the same time, he kind of craves the attention of Benny. He's a character that really appreciates Benny's presence within his life, because after all, they've gone through a lot together. Essentially, as it's mentioned within the very first story of this series, this version of the Doctor is basically relying on Benny as an anchor to our universe, and as a result, we basically see him wanting to pass the time through the use of board games, letting them bond together and basically have a chat, and naturally also have him trying to take up cooking at the same time. However, it is not long before Benny decides to dig up the past of the planet, because she believes that surely this very unremarkable world must have something lurking in its past. We are also introduced to a tribe throughout this story, however they are no more than background characters. They don't really have anything to say. They kind of just lumber about, not really doing anything in particular, and that is used throughout this story, so it is definitely a focus on Benny and the Doctor. But more importantly, this episode has a darker theme running throughout. It's one of those stories where you kind of have a build-up in suspense. You know that something is on the corner, however you're not quite sure what. And again, to be honest, I found it a really good listen, because the way that we have that final act throughout this episode is something that I really didn't expect. However, I did appreciate it. I would in fact go as far to say that, considering that this is a story that again is focusing on these two main characters, it actually is possibly my favourite episode of the series, including all the volumes that we've seen so far between Bernice and the Unbound Doctor, because there's something about this relationship that stands out a lot of the other Doctor-companion relationships. I would dare say if this was a 7th Doctor and Ace story, or a 5th Doctor and Tegan story, it wouldn't be as effective as this episode is, because the characters are so different and interesting. And because we have a Doctor from another universe, you're still quite unsure as to how he's going to act in a certain situation, and a theme that has also been carried out throughout the entirety of this series, where both of the characters believe that they know best. They know, the Doctor knows how Benny's going to act, and Benny knows how the Doctor is going to act. However, both of them are kind of full of surprises. And finally, we conclude the box set with episode 4, which is Gallifreyan, as written by A.K. Benedict and Guy Adams. Now, this is a story that, for those of you that have been listening to this series for the past few volumes, you will know it's all been leading up to this. We have the Gallifreyans basically catching up with this other version of the Doctor. However, of course, this time round they're going to imprison him, the offence basically existing. However, it's up to Benny to defend him in court, because we have another episode that is a smaller version of Trial the Time Lord, but Gallifreyan is a little bit off, and Benny and the Doctor don't quite know what's up. Of course, this story also sees the return of Sean Carlson as Narvin, and I do love Narvin. Of course, I've listened to a number of the Gallifrey series, including Gallifrey Time War, and I think there's something about his character where, if you're a fan of Line of Duty, he's kind of the DSR not of the Doctor Who universe, who kind of lurks in different series. Of course, I do believe we've seen him in one of the War Master box sets very briefly, and then he's also going to be in one of the upcoming ones from what I can remember. I like the fact that Narvin is branching out into other series. To be quite honest, I could actually see a Narvin spin-off at some point, and when Gallifrey Time War comes to an end, I'm presuming that they're going to need to think something up relating to the Gallifrey series, because I can't see them ending it entirely. But what's really nice about this episode is that we once again relate back to the Doctor's past. We have the Doctor starting this story and feeling almost like he's back at home, because after all, the Gallifreyan, his universe, was destroyed a long time ago, and as a result, he kind of has a sense of belonging. But as this story goes on, basically that sense of belonging is ripped from him, and again we have this version of the Doctor that is trying to find his place within this other version of the universe. However, he's not quite finding it, and we have Benny in this situation that is trying to make his life better, because he doesn't care what happens within the Time Lord trial, because he's left Benny to defend a person who has never researched Gallifreyan law, has never practiced Gallifreyan law, and no doubt doesn't even understand Gallifreyan law. So as a result, naturally, of course, I did really like this story, because we got to understand a little bit of Gallifreyan legal terminology, and the rather unusual offence of existing, and Benny trying to prove that this version of the Doctor doesn't exist, but he does, but he doesn't at the same time. And again, I know I keep saying it throughout the entirety of this review, however, all 4 episodes do a different thing and build upon this relationship that we have between the Unbound Doctor and Benny, and this episode in particular shows that reliance on the relationship, leading to a rather emotional scene in the later half, where you kind of realise that both of them really depend on each other, and as a result it kind of leaves an open bookend as to where this series is going to go next, because you do have Gallifrey basically coming under attack. Basically the Time Lords are scared of change, and being of course the leaders of time, that is very unusual. However, at the same time, regeneration is also leading to deaths, because Gallifrey has been invaded by an unknown force. It's a little bit like a Gallifrey Time War series kind of episode, where the entirety of time and Gallifrey itself is at stake. However, I think that this episode kind of raises a few unanswered questions that no doubt we'll get to hear more about in the later volumes of this series. Although something that I must warn is that although this episode does feature Narvin, I would say he's kind of a support role. He's not necessarily the main focus of the story, because I think he's a little bit of support to kind of lurk there in the background, because as per usual, Narvin being Narvin, basically he's received the bad end of the stick, and he's got a little bit possessed by an unknown force, and as a result is kind of acting a little bit unusual. So I imagine once again, within the later volumes of this series, we might get a recontinuation of this episode with Narvin, with Gallifrey, and perhaps even another incarnation of the Doctor in there as well. I feel like that needs to happen at some point, and I would adore it to be one of the classic series Doctors meeting up with the Unbound Doctor, and basically then realising that they are very different but very similar at the same time, because I feel like the Doctor from our universe could learn quite a lot from the Unbound Doctor, because he's gone from this very stern character, and Benny has softened his personality ever so slightly, but his approach to things is still quite reckless, quite different, and probably will put the Doctor from our universe's adventurous lifestyle a little bit on edge. So in conclusion, for the new adventures of Bernice Summerfield Volume 6, as titled Lost in Translation, featuring Lisa Bowerman and David Warner, to be quite honest, if you want any evidence as to why Lisa Bowerman and David Warner are absolutely incredible actors, then this box set is for you, because it is basically a showcase across all 4 stories of how excellent they are as actors. I think that all 4 stories contribute something overall to the narrative of this series, and it challenges the relationship that we have, and it's very unusual to have a box set that has a cast list that is this small. However, it works to this story's benefit. I think the entire story of this series, challenging the relationship, but also at the same time having your usual Doctor Who sci-fi traits in there. We've got an alien spaceship, an alien world, a little bit of fan service with the inclusion of Gallifrey, but also a few single-handed stories in there as well, which are quite experimental. I think this box set does a lot, and more importantly, it reminds me of the new adventures of Bernice Summerfield Volume 3, of course the beginning of the David Warner and Lisa Bowerman series, which is a box set that I'm very fond of indeed. So this is one that I definitely recommend if you listened to the previous box sets within this series. So thank you very much for watching this review. I hope you have enjoyed it. Do of course stay tuned on The Host Productions for brand new Doctor Who content each and every week. And of course on that note, I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.